The smile that hid a monster, the sound of a ceramic mug shattering against the hardwood floor is something I'll never forget. Some people remember the day their lives changed because of a phone call. Others remember a knock at the door. For me, it was the sound of coffee spilling across polished oak and the terrifying silence that followed. By the time I reached the living room, my wife, Helen, was lying motionless on the floor. A thin stream of blood ran from the side of her head, slowly spreading across the rug she had proudly picked out almost 20 years earlier. Standing only a few feet away was the man responsible, Arnold Benson. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't trying to help. He wasn't even pretending to care. Instead, he looked down at Helen with the coldest smile I'd ever seen. Then he looked directly into my eyes. She lost her balance, he said calmly. If anyone asks, that's what happened. Before I could answer, he stepped over the broken coffee mug, straightened his expensive jacket, and walked out of my house as if he had just finished discussing the weather. The front door closed. His truck disappeared down the street. Only then did I drop to my knees beside Helen. Helen, sweetheart, stay with me. My hands trembled as I pressed a kitchen towel against the wound on her head. Blood soaked through the fabric almost immediately. I dialed emergency services with fingers that barely obeyed me. The dispatcher kept talking. Sir, can you hear me? Is she breathing? Basher? Yes. Barely. Keep pressure on the wound. Those few minutes felt longer than the previous 64 years of my life. The ambulance arrived quickly. Paramedics rushed inside. One checked Helen's pulse while another prepared oxygen. They loaded her onto a stretcher and hurried toward the ambulance. I climbed into my pickup and followed behind, praying to God that I wouldn't lose the woman who had spent 41 years standing beside me, through every joy and every hardship life had thrown at us. As I drove toward Memorial Hospital, one question echoed inside my mind. How had it come to this? The answer wasn't simple. It had started years earlier, long before blood stained my living room floor. Long before Arnold's smile became something I feared. It started the day my daughter introduced us to the man she insisted was the love of her life. Uppercut? Arnold arrived wearing a tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than my first truck. He walked with the confidence of someone who believed every room belonged to him. His handshake was firm, too firm, the kind of handshake meant to establish dominance instead of friendship. I'm Arnold Benson, he said proudly. I own one of the fastest growing construction companies in Texas. For the next 2 hours, Arnold talked almost exclusively about himself. His business, his income, his investments, his expensive vacations, his luxury pickup. Every conversation somehow returned to one subject, Arnold. Whenever someone else tried speaking, he redirected the attention back to himself. At first, I assumed he was simply nervous. Helen wasn't convinced. That night, after Clementine and Arnold left, she quietly washed dishes while I dried them. Without looking at me, she whispered, "Did you notice how he never once asked about us?" I shrugged. Maybe he's just ambitious. She shook her head. No. There's something missing behind his smile. I laughed gently. I think you're worrying too much. Looking back now, I wish I had listened. The wedding took place 11 months later. It was beautiful. Our daughter looked happier than I'd ever seen her. Arnold stood proudly beside her, smiling for every photograph. Everyone congratulated them. Everyone believed they had a bright future ahead. Everyone, except Helen. During the reception, she squeezed my hand. I hope I'm wrong. So do I replied. Neither of us realized that those would become some of the saddest words we'd ever speak. The changes happened slowly, almost invisibly. At first, family dinners became less frequent, then birthdays, then holidays. Whenever we invited Clementine over, Arnold always seemed to have another plan. A business meeting, a weekend trip, an important client. Eventually, our daughter stopped calling every week, then every month. When she did answer the phone, her voice sounded different, quieter, more careful, as though someone was listening nearby. Helen noticed immediately. She's changing. I tried convincing myself it was simply marriage. People get busy, life changes, families grow. But deep inside, I knew Helen was right. One Sunday afternoon, Helen baked Clementine's favorite chocolate cookies. She packed them into a small tin and asked if we could surprise them. When we arrived, Clementine hugged us tightly. Arnold barely looked up from his phone. Helen smiled warmly. I made your favorite. Arnold opened the container, took one look, closed it. We're trying to eat healthier. His tone wasn't rude. It was worse. It was dismissive. Helen apologized immediately. I'm sorry. I didn't know. You never ask, Arnold replied. The room fell silent. On the drive home, Helen stared out the window. I was only trying to do something nice. I reached across the seat and held her hand. I know. But somehow, that wasn't enough. Every visit became another opportunity for Arnold to criticize someone. Helen folded laundry incorrectly. She bought the wrong groceries. She arrived too early. She stayed too late. Nothing she did was ever acceptable. And somehow, she always apologized. One evening, I finally asked why. Helen, why do you keep saying sorry? She smiled sadly. Because if I don't, he'll take it out on Clementine. That answer broke something inside me. Arnold crosses a line that changes everything forever when a family gathering turns into a nightmare. And Merle quietly begins preparing a plan that will eventually destroy the empire Arnold spent years building. For a while, I convinced myself that Arnold's behavior was nothing more than arrogance. Plenty of successful people developed oversized egos. It didn't necessarily make them dangerous. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first real warning came on a rainy Thursday evening. Helen had invited Clementine and Arnold over for dinner. She spent the entire afternoon preparing their favorite meals: roast chicken, homemade mashed potatoes, fresh bread, and the peach cobbler our daughter had loved since childhood. By the time they arrived, the table looked like something from a holiday celebration. Helen smiled proudly. I hope you're hungry. Clementine smiled back. It smells amazing, Mom. Arnold barely glanced at the table. As soon as he sat down, he frowned. You still use this old china? Helen looked confused. Yes, we've had it for years. He picked up a plate and examined it like a judge inspecting evidence. My grandmother had dishes like these. They belonged in a museum. He laughed. No one else did. Helen quietly reached for the serving spoon, pretending not to hear him. Throughout dinner, Arnold criticized everything. The chicken was too dry. The potatoes had too much butter. The bread wasn't warm enough. Even the coffee was cheap. Helen apologized after every complaint. I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. Those words became so common that they sounded automatic. When dessert was served, Clementine accidentally spilled a little juice on the tablecloth. Before Helen could grab a towel, Arnold slammed his hand against the table. The loud bang startled everyone. What is wrong with you? He snapped at Clementine. Can you do anything without making a mess? The room froze. Clementine's smile disappeared instantly. She lowered her head like a frightened child. It's okay, Helen said softly, reaching for the napkins. I'll clean it. Arnold pointed toward Helen. This is exactly why she never learns. You fix every mistake she makes. I slowly placed my fork on the table. That's enough. Arnold looked at me for the first time that evening. Excuse me? You heard me. This is our home. You don't raise your voice at my daughter. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Arnold smiled, not because he was amused, because he enjoyed confrontation. He leaned back in his chair. "I think we're leaving." Without another word, he stood. Clementine immediately followed him. Before walking out, she whispered to Helen, "I'm sorry." Helen hugged her tightly. "You never have to apologize to me." The front door closed. Silence filled the house. Helen slowly gathered the untouched dessert plates. I noticed her hands shaking. "I ruined dinner," she whispered. I walked over and gently held her shoulders. "No, you didn't ruin anything." "He did." She looked at me with watery eyes. "I just want our family back." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. Over the next several months, Arnold became even more controlling. He decided where Clementine could go, who she could talk to, how often she could visit us. Even simple phone calls became difficult. Whenever Helen called, Arnold usually answered, "Clementine's busy. We'll call later." Later almost never came. One afternoon, Helen sat on our porch holding her phone. She'd called 3 times. No answer. She sighed. "I miss my little girl." I wrapped my arm around her. So do I. Neither of us knew that Clementine wanted to call. Arnold simply wouldn't allow it. A few weeks later, we attended Maya's 7th birthday party. It should have been one of the happiest days of the year. Instead, it became another painful reminder of what our family had become. Helen spent hours wrapping gifts. She even knitted Maya a small pink sweater by hand. When Maya opened it, her face lit up. "I love it." She ran over and hugged Helen. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. Then Arnold walked over. He picked up the sweater, examined it, then placed it back into the gift bag. "We already bought her designer clothes." He forced a smile. "This really isn't her style." Helen's face fell. "Oh, I thought," Arnold interrupted. "I'm sure you meant well." Those 5 words sounded polite, but everyone understood the insult hidden beneath them. Even some of the guests looked uncomfortable. I clenched my jaw. Helen simply smiled. "If Maya likes it, that's all that matters." Arnold laughed quietly. "No. What matters is giving children quality." I had heard enough. I stepped closer. "You've embarrassed my wife for the last time." The backyard became silent. Arnold stared directly into my eyes. "You really want to do this?" I didn't answer. Because if I had, I might have said something neither of us could take back. Clementine quickly stepped between us. "Please, not today." She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like someone who spent every day trying to stop explosions before they happened. We left early that afternoon. On the drive home, Helen looked out the passenger window. "I don't think Arnold likes me." I almost laughed. He doesn't like anyone. But deep inside, I was beginning to realize something far more frightening. People like Arnold didn't simply dislike others. They enjoyed making people feel small, especially kind people, especially people who never fought back. And Helen never fought back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water. Helen was already there, sitting alone, staring into the darkness. "I woke you?" I asked. She shook her head. I couldn't sleep. After a long silence, she quietly said something I'll never forget. "Do you think Clementine is happy?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to reassure her. Instead, I couldn't answer. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure. What I didn't know was that only 3 weeks later, I would witness something that erased every remaining doubt in my mind. It happened in our own kitchen, and the bruise Helen tried so desperately to hide became the moment I stopped hoping Arnold would ever change and started preparing for the day he would finally face the consequences. The bruise appeared on a Monday afternoon. It wasn't the kind of injury you could ignore. A deep purple mark stretched from Helen's hip almost halfway across her side. She tried to hide it beneath a loose sweater. But after 41 years of marriage, I could read every expression on her face before she spoke a single word. "What happened?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. Then she forced a smile. I slipped while reaching for a pen. I stared at her for several seconds. "Helen." She looked away. I lost my balance. I didn't believe her. Not for a second. Later that evening, while she was taking a shower, I found the broken casserole dish in the trash. It wasn't shattered from falling. It looked like it had been thrown. The next morning, I drove to Clementine's house without telling anyone. Arnold's truck was parked in the driveway. Before I could knock, I heard voices coming from inside. Arnold's voice was loud. Clementine's was barely audible. Then came silence. A moment later, the front door opened. Arnold stepped outside carrying a toolbox. He stopped when he saw me. "Morning," he said with a fake smile. I was just leaving. I looked past him toward the hallway. "Is Clementine home?" "She's resting. I'll only be a minute." He blocked the doorway. "Today's not a good day." There was something in his eyes. Not confidence. Calculation. As if he was deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he stepped aside. Clementine was sitting at the kitchen table. The moment she saw me, she quickly smiled. Too quickly. "Dad." What a surprise. I hugged her. She hugged me back. For just an instant, I felt her shoulders shaking. She had been crying. Before I could ask why, Arnold walked back inside. "Coffee?" he asked. His voice had completely changed. Friendly, polite. It was like watching an actor switch roles the second an audience appeared. I declined. After a few awkward minutes, I left. As I drove away, I looked into the rearview mirror. Clementine was standing behind the curtain, watching my truck disappear. She didn't wave. She simply stood there. And something inside me whispered that she wanted to say something she couldn't. A week later, Helen admitted the truth. Not everything. Just enough. We were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. Without looking at me, she quietly said, "It wasn't an accident." I turned toward her. "What wasn't?" She took a deep breath. "The bruise." My heart sank. She continued. "Arnold got angry. He shoved me." The words came out so softly I almost missed them. My hands tightened around the coffee mug. Why? He thought I was interfering. With what? He said I was encouraging Clementine to visit us too often. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He pushed you because you invited your own daughter to dinner? Helen nodded. But it wasn't hard. He didn't mean, "Stop," I interrupted. For once, stop defending him. Tears filled her eyes. I'm not defending him. I'm protecting Clementine. If she leaves him, he'll destroy her. That sentence explained everything. Helen wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for our daughter. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Arnold putting his hands on Helen. Then I imagined what he might be doing behind closed doors when no one else was watching. By sunrise, I had made a decision. Hope wasn't enough anymore. If Arnold refused to change, someone would eventually have to stop him. 2 days later, I walked into the office of attorney Rick Donovan. Rick and I had known each other for nearly 20 years. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the kind of man who believed patience often accomplished more than anger. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything. The insults, the isolation, the shove, the bruise. When I finished, he folded his hands. "Can you prove any of it?" I lowered my head. "No. Helen won't testify. Clementine won't either." Rick nodded slowly. "Then don't chase what you can't prove." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward. "People like Arnold usually believe they're untouchable. They don't break one rule. They break dozens. Business, taxes, licenses, contracts. The trick is finding the truth they forgot to hide." For the first time in months, I felt something besides helplessness. A plan. Over the following weeks, Rick and I met several times. Quietly, carefully. No dramatic speeches, no revenge fantasies, only facts. Public records, building permits, inspection reports, court filings, tax documents. Everything we collected came from legal sources. Piece by piece, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Several construction projects had missing permits. Some inspections had mysteriously been signed before the buildings were finished. Former employees claimed they were paid in cash. Suppliers complained about unpaid invoices. There were whispers of forged paperwork, safety shortcuts, even payroll taxes that didn't seem to match company records. Rick organized every document into labeled folders. When he placed the final stack on his desk, he looked at me. "If these records are accurate, his company is standing on rotten foundations." I asked the question that had been haunting me. "Will this stop him?" Rick answered honestly. "I don't know. But if the law does its job, it will force him to answer for his actions." I nodded, not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted someone, anyone, to finally tell Arnold that actions had consequences. 3 months passed. Nothing happened. Life continued. Helen slowly smiled again. Clementine called a little more often. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe maybe things were improving. Then came that Friday afternoon. I had just returned from Rick's office carrying the last folder of evidence. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Helen's car. The front door was slightly open. Inside, I heard shouting, "Arnold." Then Helen's frightened voice. I dropped the folder and ran toward the living room. What I saw next would change everything. Helen stood between Arnold and the hallway. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't threatening him. She was simply asking him to leave. Arnold stepped closer, his face twisted with rage. "You think you can turn my own family against me?" Helen quietly replied, "I only want peace." For one brief second, everything became perfectly still. Then Arnold shoved her with both hands. Helen stumbled backward. Her heel caught the edge of the rug. She lost her balance. Her head struck the sharp corner of the heavy oak coffee table. The sound echoed through the room. She collapsed instantly. The coffee mug slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. Arnold looked down at her. He didn't move. He didn't kneel. He didn't call for help. Instead, he smiled. And that smile told me everything I needed to know. As the ambulance carried Helen toward the hospital, Arnold believed he'd escaped with the perfect cover story. But what he didn't know was that the folders sitting in my truck contained enough evidence to destroy everything he had spent years building. Before the sun rose the next morning, government investigators, state inspectors, and federal agencies would begin opening files that would turn his carefully crafted empire into a collapsing house of cards. Part 2 begins, where justice finally starts catching up.